Wisdom, the cornerstone of civilization. Behind me in every video stands a statue of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. She represents a constant reminder of the guiding force that shapes the morals, ethics, and laws of governing societies, influencing how communities develop, interact, and thrive. No matter our differences, no matter our culture, wisdom has throughout history been revered as a virtue of leaders and thinkers whose insight and decisions have led to prosperity and peace. Wisdom embodies the foresight to consider the future impacts of our actions, the insight to balance diverse needs, and the judgment to pursue paths that foster both harmony and sustainability. It is through wisdom that societies navigate the challenges of their times, adapting and evolving while holding true to the principles that ensure their enduring legacy. As a Greek proverb eloquently puts it, society grows grey when the old plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit. That's my view of wisdom, at least, but it's not the view that some, perhaps even many, conservative theists hold. Theists like Dennis Prager, who see wisdom as fear of God. Today we're going to take a look at a recent course published by Prager U, titled The Beginning of Wisdom, presented by Owen Anderson, a professor of philosophy, religious studies, and theology.
On the first day of my Philosophy 101 class, I asked my students this question: does life make any sense? A few awkward moments pass. One hand goes up and then another. No, life doesn't make sense, many students tell me. It seems arbitrary and full of pain and suffering.
Alright, so the first thing to notice is that Owen has phrased the world making sense as to relate to the concept of justice, evident from his emphasis on pain and suffering.
Full of pain and suffering.
However, this is not the only way to interpret life's meaning. Philosophies like Existentialism, for instance, find meaning in individual choice and personal responsibility, independent of an overarching justice system. Similarly, Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism often view life's meaning in terms of harmony and balance, rather than justice. In essence, the universe could make sense without justice being a feature, and I, for one, am convinced that it isn't a feature. And yet, from the very beginning, Owen has removed this option from the table.
How does this make them feel, I ask? They tell me it causes them anxiety and even depression. Well, what do they plan to do about it, I inquire. They have no answer. And this, of course, only adds to their anxiety.
Owen is highlighting the emotional impact of confronting life's lack of sense, which can cause anxiety and depression, and this reaction is not unusual. It is fundamentally human to grapple with such existential questions. However, what's missing here is the acknowledgement of the diverse ways individuals cope with these feelings. It's not just about finding definitive answers, but about the journey or exploration itself. Different philosophical traditions, from Stoicism to Existentialism, offer various methods to navigate these emotions. The quest for meaning, then, isn't just about resolving anxiety through definitive answers, but also about learning to live with and grow from these uncertainties. Much of what we call wisdom is the advice and success of achieving this.
Fortunately, there is an answer. It's called wisdom. Not exactly a fashionable concept these days, but given how much mental illness is reported on campus, it's primed for a comeback.
There's a very common narrative at Prager U which insists that our wisest days were when we were all religious, believing in talking snakes, abhorring the foreigner, and fearing divine retribution, whereas today we've completely lost track of wisdom. And that's what we're seeing here with Owen throwing in the claim of mental illness dominating educational institutions.
Mental illness.
But equating the rise of mental health issues solely to a lack of a specific type of biblical wisdom, which is what he and Prager do, is, well, ironically unwise. It completely ignores biological, environmental, and societal factors, as well as methodology. I mean, it's not like we have polls from the 12th century reporting happiness, do we? We today try to track mental health, and the act of tracking entails that we'll find higher reports of issues, won't we? This isn't rocket science. So how has Owen made this judgment? Is it because the world doesn't accord to his biblical views? Or is he, well, gonna back it up?
The Oxford Dictionary defines wisdom this way.
Nope, he's gonna move on, allowing the bias of Prager's audience to do the rest. Well played.
The Oxford Dictionary defines wisdom this way: the capacity of judging rightly in matters relating to life and conduct. Soundness of judgment.
Now, let's unpack this a bit, shall we? Owen has cherry-picked a definition of wisdom that can be conveniently interpreted to align with his biblical worldview. If we take a gander at the very source he cited, the Oxford Dictionary, we find there's a few ways to define wisdom. And here's where it gets interesting. These definitions aren't just about morality, they span a spectrum from philosophical insight to practical know-how. One particular definition that Owen sidestepped, probably because it doesn't fit his narrative, talks about wisdom as enlightenment, learning, erudition, even equating it to philosophy and science. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it a bit odd to ignore these broader, more inclusive interpretations? It's almost as if Owen's guiding us down a very specific theological alleyway, one that's dimly lit at the end by a church. But here's the irony. By doing this, he's bypassed a wealth of wisdom from other cultures, traditions, and yes, even other religious texts, each offering their own unique insight into what it means to be wise.
So where should we start on our wisdom journey? How about with the most significant and influential book in human history, one for which there is no close second, the Bible?
Ah, there it is, the predictable pivot to the Bible. But let's ponder this for a moment. Why the Bible? Why not start with, say, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, or even the works of Plato? Each of these texts have had a profound influence and offered deep insights into human existence and moral thought. Owen's suggestion seems less about a genuine exploration of wisdom and more about affirming a pre-established religious conviction. It's like saying that the best cuisine in the world is Italian without ever tasting Thai, Indian, or Japanese food. Owen can't even hide his agenda. He's straight to Bible bashing. And let's not forget the role of secular wisdom, the insights gleaned from science, philosophy, and even everyday life. These sources, often overlooked in religious narratives, have been instrumental in shaping our understanding of the world and our place within it. So, if we're really on a quest for wisdom, shouldn't our journey be as broad and inclusive as possible? After all, wisdom isn't the monopoly of any one book or belief system, it's the cumulative understanding of humanity's quest to make sense of the world around us.
Not surprisingly, it has a lot of thoughts on the subject. Proverbs 9:10 takes us right to the heart of the matter. The fear of God, the proverb tells us, is the beginning of wisdom. Whoa, that's a bold statement.
It sure is a bold statement, Owen, but let's be honest, it's also incredibly limiting. This idea that the genesis of wisdom is rooted in the fear of God narrows the entire scope of what wisdom can be. But wisdom isn't just about trembling before a cosmic authority. It's about critical thinking, empathy, learning from experience, and understanding the complexities of human existence. By anchoring wisdom to the fear of God, we're not encouraging a genuine pursuit of knowledge or understanding. Instead, we're promoting a mindset that views wisdom through a narrow theological lens, one that prioritizes obedience and dogma over inquiry and open-mindedness. What's more, this is implicitly a supremacist view since it entails that only Owen and his ilk have wisdom, while all other cultures and beliefs are lacking. And let's not forget, this concept of fearing God translates into fearing the interpretations and doctrines imposed by religious authorities. Authorities like Owen. Indeed, it's not about the fear of a divine being per se, but about conforming to the views and rules set forth by those who claim to speak in that being's name. In essence, what this boils down to is a form of control, a way to keep people aligned with a particular religious ideology, rather than encouraging them to explore, question, and understand the world around them in a broader, more holistic way.
But if wisdom is your concern, and the Bible thinks it should be, then fear of God is fear number one. Why?
Good question. Enlighten us, Owen. How have you turned a broad, complex, and reflective discipline into fear?
First, to fear God is a recognition that you are not God. Life suddenly has order. A clear hierarchy is established. God, then man, then animals.
Having a hierarchy does not mean that the world makes sense, though, does it? Per Owen's original question. No, we can ask, and should ask, why is there a hierarchy? You see, anyone can be this dismissive and one-dimensional, Owen. It's not just you.
If you take God out of the equation and place ourselves at the top of the pyramid, then we make the rules. We only answer to ourselves.
No, taking God out of the equation wouldn't necessarily result in us putting humans on top. What if we view existence as a web or a network where all forms of life are interconnected instead of a vertical hierarchy? This perspective, found in numerous philosophies and indigenous traditions, emphasizes mutual respect and interconnectedness rather than dominance and hierarchy. Furthermore, placing God at the apex of existence to ensure order implies that without such a belief, chaos reigns. Yet, history and anthropology show us that societies around the world have developed moral and ethical systems independent of this specific theological structure. We are inherently social beings who, like the bee, have evolved to sacrifice ourselves for the hive, or in our case, the village. We're not born with a blank slate. Our actions are influenced and constrained by the expectations and norms of our evolved psychology and the societies we live in. We don't arbitrarily make up rules like Owen suggests. Rather, we encode our conscience, which is very much evident in moral philosophy, including utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and virtue ethics. And as for rooting morality in fear, as Owen has done, well, we're not talking about morality anymore, are we? There's no compassion here for our neighbours. No, there's self-centered pursuit powered by terror. This isn't morality. It isn't wisdom. It's just fear.
The whole notion of an objective standard of right and wrong goes out the proverbial window. Morality becomes a matter of opinion.
What a frankly pathetic thing for a philosophy professor to say. This wild statement from Owen overlooks the history of moral philosophy that has grappled with ethics independently of religious doctrine. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, and Aristotle, for example, have developed robust moral frameworks based on reason, empathy, and the human experience, not divine command. These systems, like Kant's categorical imperative and Mill's utilitarianism, propose universal morals for ethical behaviours that are derived from logical reasoning and humanistic values. These aren't whimsical opinions, but well-argued, rigorously debated moral philosophies that have stood the test of time and critical examination. And unlike divine command, it hasn't changed per generation according to the new intuitions of the new generation. Owen equating the absence of a divine standard with the loss of objective morality ignores the empirical evidence from anthropology and evolutionary biology. These fields show us that many moral principles, such as fairness, empathy, and cooperation, are not exclusive to religious teachings, but are deeply embedded in our social nature as humans. Again, what an extraordinarily unwise assertion for Owen to make.
Since human beings can rationalize any behavior to suit their purposes, the result is moral confusion, even chaos.
Yeah, we're so confused, aren't we? That's why we're no longer burning people alive for not affirming very specific doctrines, such as the Trinity. It's why we raised the age of consent from 12, when in Aquinas and Augustine's time, they were ripe for the robbing. It's why we've changed our mind on how prisons work, with our new emphasis on rehabilitation. It's why we no longer have slaves, despite a certain book explicitly saying that we can. It's why we now accept that gay people actually are just being who they are. And look, even the Pope seems to be coming round to embracing the rainbow. Gee, the moral relativity of objective Christian fear, huh? Honestly, I expect this level of nonsense from the average apologist, but when it comes from a professor of philosophy, it gives philosophy a bad name, and I really am not a fan of that. I can't help but think that Owen wouldn't say such utter nonsense if it wasn't for the cross around his neck. Philosophers don't act this way unless they're theists. What gives? What's going on?
When we fear God, he did create the universe after all, we take our rightful place in the hierarchy. We're up there, but we're not in first position. To acknowledge this is an act of humility.
What never ceases to amaze me about people like Owen is their failure to recognize that, even under theism, humans still place themselves at the top. The grand disagreements about the doctrines to affirm and how to run society shift from simply saying, here are my reasons and here is my evidence, to, I know that my view is correct because God, no less, says that my view is correct. Owen is playing the same game he accuses others of playing, but he lacks the humility and insight to recognize it.
It's much easier to acquire wisdom when you don't think you already know it all.
And this is Owen having us eat his cake and have it too. He just accused us of having the chaos of our moral views changing over time.
The result is moral confusion, even chaos.
And yet in the next sentence, he's saying that we won't change our minds because we think we know it all.
It's much easier to acquire wisdom when you don't think you already know it all.
Pick a lane, my dude. And no, Owen, it is the theist who thinks that they know it all. They receive wisdom from their church, from their pastors like you, who uphold very specific doctrines of which many are at odds with the teachings of Aquinas and Augustine, not to mention the church fathers, and yet they're told by their pastors, by you, not to worry. I've got it right this time. I'm certain. I'm wise.
It's called wisdom. Not exactly a fashionable concept these days.
Indeed, Owen tells his flock that, what do you know, he has the right view, all while he preaches that the flock should lean not on their own understanding, per Proverbs 3:5. Owen is embodying projection at its finest. It's he who lacks the wisdom to change his mind, because he already thinks that he has the answer. What's more, he lacks the humility to say that he is responsible for his answer. Instead, he insists that his answer is the words of the creator of the universe. Now, I don't know about you watching, but I'm getting pretty damn sick of people who think the entire world revolves around them lecturing me on humility and wisdom.
As it says in another verse in Proverbs, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil."
Simply fear the all-loving. But we get the message, Owen. We are not to reflect and to try to figure out what the wisest decision might be. No, we'll throw logic and compassion out of the window. What we must do is simply follow what our pastors tell us, and not question whether what the pastor says aligns with what the pastor before him said. This, we're assured, is true wisdom.
Second, fearing God will very likely make you a better person. There are academic studies to back this up.
Fearing anything will make you act according to whatever the rules and regulations are. You need only look at the despots of World War II or even Vladimir Putin right now to see that fear is one hell of a motivator. The fact that people will adhere to rules of a given society out of fear is actually one of the contentions raised by atheists. Some atheists say that religion is, in part, a controlling mechanism of political utility. Thomas Paine, for instance, expressed this when criticizing Christianity. The difference, then, between an atheist and a theist when they treat each other with decency is that the atheist has a higher chance of acting on empathy and decency alone, whereas according to Owen, the theist has a higher chance of loving their neighbour not because they love their neighbour, but because they fear their collective landlord.
Just as most children fear their father, wait till your father comes home, we are to fear God's wrath.
Okay, think for a moment about the wisdom that your parental figures have instilled in you. Now, is such wisdom predicated on the fear of your parental figure hurting you? This is such a backward view of wisdom. It has nothing to do with conscience or moral deliberation.
Many of the most important commandments in the Bible, like do not put a stumbling block in front of the blind, are immediately followed by the phrase, "You shall fear God. I am the Lord." In other words, if you act in an unethical manner, I, God, will know, and there will be consequences.
Precisely. Do what God says, or else. This isn't wisdom. This is fear, and fear alone.
Fear God, and you're much less likely to do something you shouldn't. By definition, that will help you make smarter decisions.
No, it will help you act precisely as your pastor wants you to act. He, and let's face it, it's almost always a he, will imbue his own views without even a flicker of wisdom or reflection on Scripture, and then claim that his view is God's view, and that if you don't follow his view, then you're going to be punished by an all-loving God. This would be nothing but hilarious if it wasn't taken seriously by so many people. To go further, let's break this down to illustrate the point. If you lived, say, 300 years ago, you would treat the women in your life differently to how you treat the men. You'd insist that women must fulfill certain roles. You'd insist upon arranged marriages. And you'd be A-okay with the consummation of those marriages being when she's 12. And yet, if you live today, and you do, lucky you probably don't have these views. You've gone all woke, brosif. Now what gives? What's with the supposed objective morality of God? Or am I meant to simply not ask questions, shut up, and listen to Pastor Owen? After all, that's what wisdom is, right? fear of the divine, and thus unquestionable service.
That's some serious wisdom right there.
No, that's some serious fear right there. That's what that is, Owen, not wisdom.
And third, if you fear God, you will fear others less. Doing what is right becomes easier even if the consequences are not to your immediate advantage, because you know you must answer first to God, not people.
Now, while I wouldn't call this wisdom, I do agree with Owen here, and I think that one of the reasons that evolution has selected for a religious bone in the body is because it acts to prevent the conciliation of power, at least when it's exercised for tyrannical purposes. But again, this isn't wisdom, it's fear.
Of course, you might dismiss everything I've just said with one simple objection. You don't believe in God. You're an atheist. So this means nothing to you.
Indeed, there are many atheists these days. I'm one of them, and our numbers keep growing. So, what answer do you have for us, Owen? We're paying attention.
You might be surprised to know that the Bible anticipates your objection. The Psalms tell us the fool says in his heart, there is no God. The Bible knows that many will reject its advice. Of course, it says you're foolish to do so, but you can do it. You have free will, another biblical belief, by the way.
Goodness me, where to start? That is not an answer to our objection at all, Owen. All you've done here is call us a fool for not having the same beliefs as you. Very humble, by the way. Then you've claimed that we can choose not to believe, as if our beliefs are a buffet. That is, you've signed off on doxastic voluntarism, as if philosophers sign off on it too, and they don't. And then you've made reference to libertarian free will, which isn't exclusive to biblical belief, as you suggest, because many religions issue justice based on libertarian free will. And again, this view is extremely unpopular among philosophers. In fact, I'd wager that there is an extremely tight correlation between philosophers who affirm free will, libertarian free will, that is, and those that are theists. The percentage of each are certainly similar. Again, I expect such mediocre, low-resolution nonsense from the likes of Frank Turek, Lee Strobel, and Kent Hovind, but Owen is a philosopher. He should be far more nuanced than this. He gives philosophy a bad name. Isn't it peculiar that so many of the philosophers who just completely ignore entire fields of philosophy and so whimsically dismiss their colleagues just so happen to be theists? Theists that boast about their humility and moral integrity, and yet at every damn turn literally call those that disagree with them fools. It's pathetic.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's not the middle or the end, but you have to start somewhere. And that somewhere, the Bible emphatically states, is accepting the basic structure of the universe and your place in it.
Yes, we know that the Bible defines wisdom as obedience, predicated on fear of the benevolent. But you've given us atheists no reason to dance to this tune, and you've defined wisdom in a very unwise way.
I'm Owen Anderson, professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University for Prager University.
You know, Owen, the Bible teaches you to love your neighbour, and the way that you speak about atheists in such a dismissive tone makes me fear that you do not sufficiently fear this edict.
Thank you for watching this video. To keep Prager U videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
And thank you for watching this counter to the tax-deductible institution of Prager U. Unlike him, and indeed all of these apologists that spread such hateful nonsense, you can't support me tax-deductibly, because our society is messed up. But you can help us fight against this nonsense by chucking a few coins our way each month. I am heavily investing, taking a huge risk even, call it faith, to turn my one-man band into a team so that we can produce a lot more content. If you see value in what I and what we do, please do consider supporting us. It really does make a difference. Thank you for your consideration.